This is Play-by-Playcast.
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
The podcast about play-by-play guys. For play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodett. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel.
Joel?
Joel, with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Man, conference tournaments can be ruthless. Welcome back into Play-by-Playcast, everybody. My name is Joel Godet. As always, this is the podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster. Professional development podcast diving into the tips, tricks, experience, stories, process, preparations of some of the biggest and best play-by-play announcers in the business. You can find us on social media at PXPcast on Twitter. I am at Joel Godet, JoelGodett. You know, headed to the MidAmerican Conference basketball tournament this week, and it's really one of my favorite conference tournaments. I have to imagine that are out there, particularly outside the Power 5 levels in college basketball. Because of the fact that it's at an NBA venue, it is Quicken Loans Arena in Cleveland where the Cavaliers play. Both the men's and women's tournaments are going on at the same time. And it just has a big time feel to it. A lot of teams, a lot of players, a lot of officials, a lot of fans, a lot of buzz going on in Cleveland. And it's always exciting to be there for a few days and kind of feel that. And you really feel March kind of settle in and get rung in as far as college basketball is concerned. But it's ruthless, too, sometimes. You know, there have been a couple of runs since I've been at Ball State where the Cardinals on the men's or women's side have had some nice little success. The women's team got to the finals a couple of years ago. But this year, when I think any Ball State fan would have told you they felt pretty good going into it, 2 games and out. The women's team on Wednesday night, which had, NCAA tournament hopes as potentially an at-large. I mean, it was a bubble team this week, was listed in Charlie Cream's, first 8 out, basically. The first 4 out and the next 4 out, they kind of floated in that range. They got shellacked on Wednesday night, so that will end their season, at least, NCAA tournament-wise. They'll most likely make the NIT and probably make some noise there. And the men on Thursday night, or Thursday afternoon, got beat by the Kent State Golden Flashes. So the Cardinals 2 games and out. And that is one of the things that comes with the territory of being a voice of a team. And we'll get into this a little bit on today's episode of the podcast, which is kind of why I wanted to start here. Jim Donovan is our guest. He is the longtime voice of the Cleveland Browns, and he will talk on today's episode about the importance in his career of wanting to be the voice of a team. It just, ever since I've been at Ball State, the Cardinals in the major sports have never gotten over that championship hump. I've won softball and tennis and a couple other MAC titles since I've been there. But football, got into a couple of bowl games, had a field goal blocked to send one to overtime my second year here. Never gotten over that hump. Men's basketball have had some big wins, obviously beat Notre Dame back in the fall, which was awesome, but have not got over that championship hump. Women's basketball has not gotten over that championship hump. Baseball, I also call the baseball games here, got to the championship game my first year, and then 2 years after that. My first year was their best chance, but again, just couldn't get over that hump. And, as the voice of a team, you kind of wear it on your sleeve because you're invested more than being a network guy or a broadcaster that's going to drop in and call the game from an impartial standpoint. When you're the team voice, you feel it. And when the team wins, you love it. And when the team loses, it hurts. And that's one of the, tough things, but also exciting things about being the voice of an institution. Jim Donovan always wanted that in his career, and eventually did get it when he became the voice of the Cleveland Browns when they returned to the NFL in 1999. But he's done a ton of play-by-play in his career, including the Olympics, and he also spent a decade with NBC, calling NFL games on national television. And on top of that, Jim Donovan is also a local television personality in Cleveland as well. So he has a lot of different viewpoints on angles in this industry, but he is, I think, to a lot of people, first and foremost, the voice of the Cleveland Browns, and that is something he loves because he is the voice of a team and the voice of a very passionate fan base, and he can celebrate with them, or a lot more recently, you kind of wear it on your sleeve with them as well. So with that laid as the foreground, Jim Donovan is our guest this week. While I was in Cleveland for the MidAmerican Conference Tournament, had the chance to go to his office at WKYC, the NBC affiliate, and sit down for this conversation. Quick side note, I walked there because KYC is a little less than a mile away from Quicken Loans Arena. I immediately regretted that decision because it was snowing. And WKYC is right off the lake in Cleveland. I didn't realize that at the time, but it was snowy, cold, and windy, and I felt like I was walking through a bomb cyclone. But I made it, and we did this interview with Jim Donovan, the voice of the Cleveland Browns, here on Play-by-Playcast.
Well, I grew up in Boston, and they had great teams, and each team had great announcers, really great play-by-play announcers. And it was at a time when, I sound like an old man. It was at a time when not every game was on television. In fact, very few were on television. So your link to the Celtics, the Bruins, the Red Sox, the Patriots, they became, that link was whoever was doing the games. And in each sport, it was a guy that was just fantastic. And so I loved all the teams, I loved the sports, and I loved all the play-by-play announcers. And when I would go to the Boston Garden or go to Fenway Park or, wherever the Patriots were playing at that time, and it was a lot of different places, because they were kind of the ugly stepchild in the Boston sports scene at that time when I was growing up. But wherever I would go, I would always just be fascinated looking up into this little crow's nest at Boston Garden and seeing Fred Cusick or Bob Wilson, who were the voices of the Bruins, Johnny Most, who was just the charismatic voice of the Celtics, and the Red Sox had great announcers. They had Ken Coleman, they had Kirk Gowdy, they had Ned Martin. And the Patriots had great announcers, Bob Starr and Gil Santos. So I would just look up there and just be mesmerized by them. And then one Christmas, I asked my parents if I could get a tape recorder, and they gave me a tape recorder. My dad had season tickets to the Bruins games, and it was right in the height of the Bobby Orr, Phil Esposito, Jerry Cheevers era. And the Bruins that was like 2 slabs of gold to have 2 season tickets to the Bruins. And I asked him if I could take the tape recorder with me to the games. And we sat right up in the balcony, right off to the left of one of the goals, section 77, row F, seat 12 and 13. And I was 13 on the aisle. And I would bring my tape recorder to the game, and I would call the game. And then I would send the tapes out to those sportscasters in Boston and ask for feedback. And so I was just bitten by the bug at that time.
How old were you at that point, too?
I think I was only 12, 13,
okay.
Maybe 13, 14. I still have the tapes.
What'd you hear back as a 12-year-old saying, here's my stuff?
They would say, hey, you're doing pretty good. They were very good, and they were very detailed. And as I got older then, and I went to high school, and then it came time to make a selection of where I wanted to go to college, they would help me with that too, those guys. They were all very, very helpful. I mean, they may pick up the phone and call you, or they would write you a letter. And it was thrilling when you'd go to the mailbox and you'd see WBZ Radio 1030 on the envelope, and you'd open it up and they would go through things. Hey, you might want to try and do this. You can't call every play. You might have to back off a little bit on something. Your pace. Watch your pace on things. And that's how I really did it.
If nobody else finds this amusing, I know my mother will at least, because I laughed when I read that anecdote in a newspaper article last night, because one of the first things I did when I wanted to get into play-by-play, I went to a Michigan State hockey game as a fan and showed up with a tape recorder and started doing the game. And my mother always goes back to that was when it all started. What did the people around you think while you were doing that?
They, at first, everybody was looking at me. And no, I didn't do it that loud. Okay. I was at an audible level. And of course, it was so exciting in there at the Garden when the Bruins were playing that, even if you were talking, I think you were drowned out by a lot of the the crowd noise anyway. But here's, actually, I take it a step back. When I first got the tape recorder, I would turn the television volume down and try and call the game there. But then I kept saying to myself, I wonder what it would be like to play with the crowd. Can you be ahead of the crowd? What's it going to be like when there's a goal? Are you going to be on time with the call? So that's the thing that fascinated me, and that's why I took the tape recorder to the game. But people then would come up to me in between periods, and they would say, "Hey, can you play back the goal?" So I'd hit the rewind. I would go to the games and I would be armed with 4 size D batteries and 2 C90 cassette tapes. That would get me through. That would be the ultimate birthday gift to give to me, was to give me cassette tapes and batteries so that I could go to the game and do the game.
Yeah, nowadays it's easy. You just go find the sound wave and go, there's the goal. That you had literally rewind and find it and hope that you were.
Yeah, I would hear myself going, and rewind, and then I'd play the goal, and people would, come around and listen to the goal, and pretty soon I think they knew that, hey, that's the kid up in Section 77 that's doing the games. So they were all very nice. They were all very, craning their necks at first, but then they kind of thought it was pretty cool.
You've obviously developed relationships with all those guys as you're sending tapes to them at a very young age, so I'm sure you and Gil Santos knew of each other, at least. But what was it like the first Patriots game that you broadcast as the voice of the Browns, to here's this guy that you looked up to that was a mentor to you from a very young age, and all of a sudden you're doing the same game for opposing networks? Yeah,
I can remember when I got the Browns radio job, and there was a writer from Boston that called me up and said, hey, he knew that I was from Boston. And I had gotten to know him because I had done college hockey at Boston University, which was big at BU. I mean, BU was really big at hockey, especially at that time. And so he had been covering college hockey for the Globe, and he saw my name and he got in touch with me. And I remember saying, hey, I used to listen to Gil Santos do the games. And that's where I kind of picked up a little bit of the style of football that I did. And I can remember I would get up on Monday mornings to get ready to go to school, and the Patriots had played on Sunday, and Gil Santos was doing morning drive sports on WBZ. And everybody listened to WBZ in the morning during their morning drive show, and he would replay his calls from the day before, and I just thought that was fantastic. So I was all in on him. And so he quoted me in the article that Gil Santos was really a big influence in me, especially in football. And sure enough, I got a letter back from Gil Santos right away saying, hey, thank you very, very much. But I do remember, the first game, it was here in Cleveland, and the Patriots came into town, and he's in the booth right next to me, and he came right in, and we sat and we talked, and it was great. It was great. Gil Santos was a phenomenal radio play-by-play announcer in football. Just phenomenal. A great voice. He had a great delivery, great descriptive style of play. And here's the thing about him. He suffered a lot of years with bad Patriots teams and then went out on top. And I am suffering through a lot of bad years with the Cleveland Browns. And I'm hoping that it will turn and I'll be like Gil and go out on top.
You hear me, God? Please.
Yeah, really. Come on. Give me a break. But it was really neat. He was a great guy. He really was. And he was a real help.
There's obviously a lot of time between there and Cleveland, but if I can jump ahead to how you kind of became associated with Cleveland, it was interesting to me because obviously the Browns did not come first for you. Right. You were here at WKYC
right.
Doing TV first, and I thought it was interesting when I read the line that said you were worried about taking the TV route because it ultimately, not that you don't enjoy this, but ultimately you wanted to do play-by-play, and this was not that.
Right.
What was that decision like for you, and how did it eventually work out?
So I was up in Burlington, Vermont, and I was doing a lot of fun things. I was doing the University of Vermont hockey games on radio, and I was doing some University of Vermont basketball games on radio, and I was doing minor league baseball. The Cincinnati Reds had their AA team up there. So I was doing a lot of play-by-play, and I was doing, the typical, radio routine, morning sports. But I just dabbled in television. Just stuck my toe in the water. And it was just to kind of pay the cable bill, really. It really was. And I would just go over. There was a television station up there, an ABC station that was getting into news. And they said, would you come over and just read the sports at night? And I went, yeah, sure. And I went over and did it. But I was all radio. I really was. And really thought that if I was going to get a break, I thought that I would get a minor league hockey job, which would hopefully lead to an NHL job. Now, up in Vermont at that time, there wasn't a lot of high school football, and the University of Vermont did not have football. They had abandoned their program. So, lo and behold, from the television tape, I ended up catching the eye of an agent who represented broadcasting talent. And he called me up and said, "Would you mind if I sent your tape around?" And I went, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." And I got the job here in Cleveland with very little television experience. But it was a really difficult decision. And I said I would take the job. And I drove here. It was a 10-hour drive from Burlington to come here. And I was going to be the weekend sportscaster. And I get here, and I had buyer's remorse right away. I mean, I called back to Vermont and said, "Have you filled my job yet?" You know, I didn't. I was very, very worried about it because there was no promise I would ever get back to play-by-play. And I was just kind of wondering if I took the job just for income. And I had put in, a sufficient amount of time in Minnesota and in Vermont, staying on this road of trying to get a play-by-play job and just get better at it. And maybe I was just putting the brakes on too early. So I really was concerned about that.
When you got to Cleveland, though, and once you're here, how did this grow on you? How did you grow into it? What made you come to love that you made the right decision?
Well, first of all, when I got here, the television station at the time was owned by NBC. So that was a big plus, I have to tell you. And that helped me a great deal.
Well, and did that eventually lead to NFL on NBC?
That's exactly how it happened. And the television station at the time when I got here also had the preseason rights to the Cleveland Browns games. So when, I also told them, I'd really like to do play-by-play. Could I try and pick up some radio play-by-play on the side? And they said, well, as long as it fits into your television schedule, that would be okay. But that was going to be difficult to shoehorn in. So they said, why don't you join us on the preseason football game? So I was like, the first year that I did it, I was like the pregame host, halftime show guy, wrap up the game, the third man in the booth. And I did that. And it was great, though. I mean, I had gone from broadcasting college hockey, and now suddenly I'm sitting in an NFL booth with the Cleveland Browns. The next year was a big break for me because then they said, why don't you do the play-by-play of the games? And from that, NBC saw one of my tapes. And at that time, if they took an interest in you, they gave you a 2-game tryout to join them and see if you could do regional games. And so the next year I got a 2-game tryout with them, and then that blossomed into like 11 years of doing regional games for them. So that's how Cleveland kind of grew on me at that time. But I have to tell you, it was at that time too, the Browns were great. They were really good. And it was Kozar, and Marty Schottenheimer was the coach, and they were playing those epic games against the Broncos. And I just, as much as I loved doing the NFL games on NBC, and it was fun, I was away from Cleveland every Sunday. Very rarely would I get a Browns game. And I just kept saying, I would really like to be the voice of a team, And so that was the missing piece for me at that time. And then eventually it came true that I would get that. But really, that's how it all happened.
Tell me about the 2-game tryout and what it's like. I don't know if pressure's the right word, but when they say, listen, we're going to put you on, basically national television, regional and national television. Here's 2 games, don't screw it up. What was that process like for you?
Well, it was, they bring you to a camp, almost like a 3-day seminar, like a training camp, a boot camp in the summer, and probably just as teams are getting set to open up their training camps. And everybody's there. Okay, so I fly into New York, and I know at some point I'm going to get the 2 games, but they don't promise when you're going to get them. Okay. I mean, they don't tell you. You're going to get it on September 14th. I mean, they'll just call you and say, hey, this week you're going to get a game, and you don't know when it's going to be. So
you have to study well in advance so that you know you're on your
Right. So I go to the seminar, and suddenly I'm in the room, and there's Dick Enberg and Marv Albert and Bob Costas and Paul McGuire and all. They're all there, and Merlin Olsen at the time, and all of these guys that were there. And you're sitting in the room with them, and they're going over, this is how we're going to do the games. This is how we sign a game on. This is what we do. In the way we like to see the games done. This is the NBA NBC style. So, I mean, I was soaking it up. But I was waiting for the call to come. And then finally, it was the year that there was a strike in the NFL, and they had replacement players playing. And NBC at one point during that strike, I think they were doing like Canadian Football League games. And then finally when they did the replacement players, they got back to doing games. And then finally the strike ended. And that's the first week that I got a game. And it was the Miami Dolphins playing the Buffalo Bills, and my partner was Paul McGuire. And he was just fantastic. Funny, fantastic. He was just great. I mean, I couldn't have asked for anything better. And, so you're nervous. I think I had both teams memorized backwards and forwards. I mean, really, backwards. Every night I would have someone quizzing me on who's 69, and all that. And so I did that, and I went down there, and it was a great game. I mean, great game, back and forth, both teams scoring. Marino's playing for the Dolphins. Jim Kelly is really coming of age playing for the Bills. Sure enough, the game goes down the wire, and suddenly the game is scooped up by the entire network. You know how if there's a game that's a blowout, they'll say, well, it's obvious this game's over. Now we're going to take you to Miami and Buffalo. And they come in your ear and they say, okay, we have the whole network now. And this is my first game. And Buffalo ends up tying the game up in the last second. They go into overtime, and they end up winning the game in overtime down in Miami. And it was really kind of the evolution of Marv Levy and the Bills at that time. And so now, I mean, I was ecstatic. And everybody kept telling me you did really great. And then they had a coach. You have a coach at NBC at the time. And it was Marty Glickman, the really famous Giants, Jets, great guy. So he would critique your game on Tuesday morning. You would get a call at 10 o'clock in the morning.
I feel like this was probably very straightforward.
He was really, and he was fantastic. And he told, I got the call, and he said, hey, as far as first games go, you did a great job. And so I ended up, that was my first game. I got the next game. And then I got games after that, which meant that, I probably had passed the test.
I was going to ask you, actually, I'm glad you brought Marty Glickman up there, because especially when you get to like the network level, I feel like one of the big questions people have is, well, what does this person look for? What does that coordinating producer look for? Yeah. What does this network look for? Right. What is good to this person, that person? What's good for NBC is not necessarily good for CBS and vice versa. What was good at NBC? What did they want from you, and what kind of classified as like this is what we want a broadcast to sound like from our announcers? Well, they wanted you. There was a huge shift early in my years there, and they went from Michael Weissman, who was really a baseball guy. Okay. Michael Weissman was kind of the game of the week. The Saturday afternoon game of the week, and NBC had the World Series and all that. So he was overseeing football, but really baseball was his hot button. So he kind of left it up to the individual game producers. So it would vary, and I was at a point where I wasn't on a permanent team, so I would have you produce the game one week, and then I'd have another guy produce the game the next week. And so you had to really on the fly learn what they wanted, how they wanted you to do things. The following year, though, there was a huge shift, and they brought a guy over from CBS by the name of Terry O'Neill. And Terry O'Neill was famous for putting together big-time broadcast teams. He put Summerall and Madden together. He put together, and he had a definite way of how he wanted you to do the games. So the days of flying in on Saturdays to do a game on Sunday ended. And NBC, and now you would go in on Friday morning. You had to be in on the first flight to wherever the game was being played. You met with the home team all day Friday and Saturday morning. Then the visiting team would come in Saturday. You met with, and I mean, these meetings would go on. So you would have, suddenly it shifted to you're going to meet with more than just the head coach. You're going to meet with 10 players, both coordinators, and the head coach for both teams. And then then you would meet with the visiting team when they would come in, typically at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then there was another broadcast meeting. You'd go over
here's how the game's going to, you'd have to write the tees, and they would have the play-by-play guy write the tees. And so you'd work with the producer on how that had to be done. And you'd record the tees the next morning in the booth once you got there. And then they would go over the whole broadcast procedure. Terry O'Neill was he was a great guy he wanted you to say, yesterday when we were sitting with Dan Marino, he was saying, hey, he was, on Tuesdays he was finding that, he had a dead arm. And so he would take, Wednesday he would come out and just hope that his arm had a lot more life in it, and they wanted you to, take out little tidbits from the conversations that you had with the players or the coaches and tell stories in the game. And you could never do enough of them in the game. Well, we were at practice yesterday, and I noticed that, and he loved that. So there was a real style change at NBC once Terry O'Neill got in there. Very strict, a lot of preparation. But I have to tell you, as tough as it was, I think I still use a lot of those things today.
How do you not over-prepare in a situation like that? Because, sometimes I feel like there is no such thing as that. But at the same token, I know for myself there are times where I've gone into a game and been like, I have so much information and now I don't know what to do with it and how to cogently put it forward. When you're spending that much time with guys, how did you best organize yourself to say, this is the direction we're going with all of that?
Well, that's where a guy like, the coaching, and you see, Marty Glickman then was kind of phased out, and it was Terry O'Neill himself that would call you on Tuesday. And he would tell you, he would go through the game with you, and he'd have notes on every game, and he would say, hey, listen, you really tried to squeeze something in here. And I think that's what happens. That's what you're alluding to. And that's a very, very easy thing to fall victim to, is that you have so much that you forget about the game, and you're worried more about the stories than you are about the game. And sometimes I think it just comes from experience, and all of a sudden you just get a feel of when there's too much. And that's probably where a good guy in the truck, a producer, has good ears and says, hey, this might be a good time to talk about, what Jim Kelly was talking about, getting these new receivers or something like that, or running the no-huddle offense, because it was at the birth time of that for the Bills. This might be a good time to squeeze that in right now, or don't do that right now. We'll do it, we're going to get you a shot. We'll set it up. We'll do it properly. We'll come back from commercial. We'll show him on the bench, get into the story there and then get out of it. So I think that, I would probably challenge anybody to go in and have the right read on that situation, because it's coming gushing out, and you just have to filter. You have to have a filter on it. And then I think you can hear it if you're doing too much of it,
You said you eventually did want to be a team guy, though, and you wanted that opportunity. So as great as doing network stuff was for the more than a decade that you were there, you did get a chance to be the voice of the Cleveland Browns. And what I thought was amazing was when they left, there was the plan for them to come back.
Right.
And the fact that you basically, for 3 years, kind of had your own personal ball set in motion to say, I'm going to set myself up to get this job.
Right.
How did you do that, and how did you make it work out?
So what I did was, they left, and as soon as they left, weeks, as sad as it was, but it wasn't a long time after the season ended and they left and they went to Baltimore, but that the NFL said, okay, in 3 years you'll have a team back. So right away I said to myself, okay, 3 years from now, there's going to be a whole process of, they're going to find out, who's going to be doing the games. Our radio station's going to be picked, an announcer's going to be picked, an analyst is going to be picked, whatever. How do I separate myself and not just say, well, I did 9 years of games on NBC, I should get the job, right? Because there'll be a lot of factors, and believe me, there were. You could write a book on how the selection of the new voice of the Cleveland Browns went down. So what I did was I was still doing some games on NBC, but then NBC lost the contract, the AFC contract. And so they were out of football, but they had Notre Dame. Remember, they had the Notre Dame contract. So my friends at NBC would send me the Notre Dame game tapes, the broadcast tapes. And I would take it to a studio here in Cleveland, and they would strip off the announcer, that channel, and I would call the game. Okay. I would, get the lineup. I'd get the flip card from Notre Dame of what that game was. And I would call the game, and I did it for a lot of times. And then I just went to local colleges around the area here. I didn't go to Ohio State. So I'd go to Baldwin Wallace, or I'd go to Akron or Kent or someplace like that, and say to them, hey, listen, do you have a spot in the press box if I could just go in? And I went back to, doing the games into a tape recorder, and that's how I did it.
For a lot of people, I feel like that would seem crazy to them, just because, like, here's this guy who's humbling himself to this point, but he's doing it with a purpose.
Yeah.
What's it like when you're in those situations?
Well, the other thing too was, I had to get back to doing a radio call. Yeah. That was important because that was the curveball. At least verbally, people were using against me. They were saying, well, I know you did football, but you did it on TV. That's very different than doing it on the radio. And they're correct. But I was, smart enough to realize that I had to be different on the radio. And I really welcomed that more. I would say this, that when you were doing the games at NBC, the analyst was the star. The game is built around the analyst. They have all these replays and telestrators and drawings on the screen, and that's for the analyst. You're kind of getting him to the right spot, and you're filling in the blanks. Radio, much different, right? Because, you're the guy, and I welcomed that. I really wanted to do that. So it was humbling only in the sense that, you're back to... Yeah, I can remember doing football games at St. Cloud, Minnesota, and climbing up a pole to get into the press box, and you're kind of back to that a little bit. But I had my eyes. I was very focused on what I wanted to do, and at least mechanically and aesthetically, I wanted to be ready because I knew there were going to be a lot of people that wanted in on it. Everybody wanted in on it. So, I just didn't think you were going to get it because you wore a coat to the interview and it had the NBC peacock on it, that they would give you for when the weather got cold. You had to be good, you really did, and that's how I had to win it, and that's pretty much what I set myself up to do.
I asked you this for television. Let me ask you it for radio now as well. On that note, what's good for football to you on radio when you listen to a football game? What do you want to hear, and what do you want to convey when you do it?
Well, I really think that this is very, very important. I think when you're doing football on the radio, you have to do radio. I don't think you can do TV football on the radio. And I sometimes find that there are guys that do that, and you're not giving me enough when I'm driving along listening to the game. Sure. Really, I want to know what the formation is. I want to know down and the mechanics, down, distance, how much time, where's the ball, But then I want to know because if you're a real good football fan, if you're really into it, you want to know what formation they're in. Was there a change up until the snap? And then I think that you have to find kind of a cadence or a rhythm, and people get used to your cadence and your rhythm, and I think you have to find that flow. So that's how I call it. I kind of do I smother it? Probably a little bit, but I think that how the old line of you have to paint the picture. I'm really into that. I am really into painting the picture. I go back to the old. You probably remember this when they talk about people doing. Sports on the radio, that you go back to the old way of saying there are two people driving in the car. They wanted to go to the game that day, but something happened. They couldn't go to the game that day. They had to go Christmas shopping. It was the only day they could get to the mall. And they're driving along, and you're doing the game for them. Yeah. And that's what I like. And I listen to everybody. Everybody, whether it's college or in the NFL, and pick up little traits and compare what I do to what they do. And it's just an ongoing thing. And plus, every game, it's like a pitcher in baseball. You go in, you'd like to pitch the perfect game. Yeah. It's very difficult to do, and maybe it's undoable to call the perfect game. But I think you should go in trying to do that.
Do you have any tricks that help you in that? And it could be with anything. I'll ask that really vaguely, just in terms of, I don't know, reminding yourself, even if it's like time and score on a long drive when there's no huddle and you don't have time to get to it, or identifying guys quickly because sometimes you can't tell when it's down the field, or trying to recognize something when you see a formation or you see a trick play, and just being able to, I don't know, things that are triggers for you that you think help make you more successful?
I get myself into a rhythm, when the team is coming up to the line of scrimmage, and it's for me, and I think it is for the listener, and that is there are just certain bullet points. What's the down, what's the distance, where's the play clock. I mean, if I get a feel that the play is taking a long time, I want to make sure that, I get the play clock in. Unfortunately, the Browns run that play clock down an awful lot as they try to get lined up. But I think that's important. So there's a checklist. And again, I think people get comfortable with your checklist, but the most important person that's comfortable with it is me. And that is, I really like to set the formation. I love doing it. I love bringing the play right up to the snap. If there's motion, if I see a blitz. But the other thing I think that I have to do, and I think I do it pretty well, is that, and I learned it at NBC, you got to make your partner good, okay? And I don't try to out-football the football guy. So the analyst has played the game, and typically they play at a very high level, and they know the game, and that's why they're sitting beside you. And you got to leave him room to be able to do his thing. And then I only ask him, leave me room to do my thing, and we're going to be great. But you also want to be able to, make it, so comfortable for everybody and comfortable for your partner. And Marv Albert is a great guy for doing that. He makes his partners really become almost cult heroes. Mike Fratello is the czar of the telestrator. When he was doing the Knicks and the Rangers on radio in New York, his partners, were really characters made by him. Yeah. And I really noticed that. And so, at NBC, they wanted you to do that because those were the stars of the show. And in radio, too, the same thing. Even though you're with the same guy every week, I think it's like a comfortable pair of shoes that when people listen to the two of you, they realize these are two guys just sitting really having a descriptive conversation on Sunday afternoon.
Do you lead into them as much as you can, or do you just try to get out and leave them space to do their thing?
If I think that there's a point that I want them to get into, I definitely lead into. But as soon as the play is over, I have sufficiently identified, what happened and who did it and who didn't do it. If I think that there's a point that needs to be made, I'll lead him into it. But I think that once again, when you've worked with the same person for a long period of time, and I've worked with my partner Doug Deacon for 19 years now, we pretty much know. And that's fun. That's really fun. We have a good time together, and so it swings both ways.
I have a couple more things for you, and then I know I got to let you get back to work. But we mentioned this off the top with Gil Santos. God willing that you've been through some tough years, and maybe you'll get a chance to go out on top at some point here with the Cleveland Browns. What's it like? How do you deal with broadcasting one win in 2 years and continuing to make that interesting and exciting and draw people in and give them a reason to listen when the end result's not going to be what you want it to be? Yeah,
I go back to 1999, really, and I fell kind of victim to what everybody around Cleveland fell victim to. Everybody around here thought that 3 years away, and even though it was a true expansion team, and I mean in the highest form of the definition of expansion team, it was a true expansion team when it came back, that it was not just going to be, hey, we're going to pick up where we left off when they left town, which was a pretty competitive team. In 94, they went to the playoffs. 95, they were really a good team, but because of the move, and everything that became so chaotic here, no team could function in that type of atmosphere. But we all thought, we don't know who the heck these guys are, but they're going to put on an orange helmet. They're going to have 72,000 people screaming for them and barking for them, as is the case in Cleveland, and we'll be good. And, man, I'll tell you what, it was a punch in the nose, a punch of reality that it was going to struggle. And I have to tell you, the first couple of years, it really wore me down because they only won the first year when they came back, they won 2 games. And the next year, they only won 3 games. And then I said, I think you're taking this I said to myself, I think you're taking this too personal. You still have to just go in and do the games. And the result takes care of itself. And, you'd love to see them win, but right now they're not built to win. So there was a midpoint, maybe 5 or 6 years into it, that I just didn't cop an attitude. That's kind of a harsh way to say it, but I just came in with a different attitude that I was going to go in and just do a really good job on the games and let the game take care of itself. You can't hide it. I mean, if they play well, they play well. And if they don't, it's not a problem. And believe me, the Browns had no control over anything that I would say or restrictions or Monday morning meetings about, hey, you were a little rough on us yesterday. They were very good about that. And but the last 2 years have been a test. I mean, it's been incredible. I think what you do is you just go in and you have to take a look at the game, and I'm not saying you just have to call it straight, and you have to be very honest about it. And the team has been totally stripped down to try and do a massive rebuild. And in doing that, you're going to probably have an awful lot of players, young players on the team. Young players make mistakes. Young players don't win games in the fourth quarter where veteran teams do win games. And this is what's happened here. But it has been tough. I thought we were past the 1 win, no wins, 3 win seasons. I really did. I thought that we were on the cusp of being past, that, and occasionally being, taking a run at a wild card spot or a division, a battle for the division deep into December. But we've gone backwards, and there's a plan here to do that. Now, whether or not that's going to succeed, we'll have to let it play out on the field. But I wouldn't say, because I readjusted my attitude like 6 or 7 years into it, I just go in really to do the game. And I think people appreciate that. I think they do.
I think that's the interesting thing, too. We went through this at Ball State. The last 8 games of the year I just called this past season were all legitimately 50 to 60 point blowouts. And there's a point in that game where you're like, what am I supposed to do? But if you take the attitude of literally just call the game, and we were in a similar situation, It was stripped down, young kids, a lot of freshmen playing, they make mistakes, they get beat, and you call it for what it is. And you explain the fact that, listen, Bryce Cosby's a rookie. He got beat. This is why he got beat. This is where he'll get better, and let's appreciate the great offense on the other side and how they pulled that off. Yeah. Probably makes it a little bit easier than just kind of sulking and throwing your hands up and going what am I watching?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I have to tell you, I loved watching Deshaun Kaiser at Notre Dame. I really did. I'm an Irish Catholic kid from Boston. That was your team, and I loved watching him at Notre Dame. So when he got here, I was very, very excited. I'm going, wow, this is really cool. Because he did some really good things there. More in the first year that he played than in the second year that he played. But, I thought he maybe got yanked in and out of the lineup by Brian Kelly a little bit in his second year. But it would all smooth out. But in no way did I think he was going to be the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns on opening day against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So you just have to say to yourself, there might be a Cinderella story here, but probably not. Rookie quarterbacks starting right away, they go through a process that at times is very, very difficult to go through. And that's with a decent team. This was a young team across the board, everywhere. So this was going to be a struggle. So I had kind of prepped myself that was going to happen. But you're right. I mean, you beg for a competitive game every Sunday. The tough part for me, and I'm sure you probably go through this when your team is losing 8 games in a row. The hard part for me is seeing the emptiness of the stadium. Yeah. That's tough, because Sundays here in this area are still big football Sundays. I mean, I don't know that Cleveland's a great basketball town. It is a great LeBron town. The Indians, when they're good, they're loved. If they're not good, you go to Dollar Dog Night and that's about it. But the Browns are precious, whether they're, people, even though they're 1-31 in the last 2 years, people are, if you listen to a sports talk show around town today, okay, as you and I sit here, they're not talking about will the Cavs beat the Nuggets tonight. They're saying, what are they going to do with that first pick? And then what are they going to do with the number 4 pick? And are they going to take Saquon Barkley? Are they locked into a quarterback? What are they going to do in free agency with all of that money? And that's what it's all about. So to see the stadium empty, and I get it, it's 10 degrees down there, and it's December, and they're not going to win at that point, and it's a tough thing to go watch. It will be great to see the place full again and to see people really looking forward to Sundays again, because it truly is a great football area.
Let me end on this note. I'll bring it back home with the Browns and your job here at WKYC.
Right.
It's an interesting dynamic, and we've had some people on this podcast that have done the radio talk show voice of a team. Grant Napier in Sacramento does that. I think you're the first guy that I've talked to, though, that is also a local TV personality.
Right. How
do you balance those two things of being the voice of a team while simultaneously covering that team for one of the TV stations in town?
Well, I tell you, it is tricky, but it's never been trickier than this past year. And it wasn't really about the record. It wasn't the fact that they didn't win a game. But it was about the fact that the owner of the team, his company, Pilot Flying J, was involved in a serious federal, trial for fraudulent, paying off, shortchanging companies on paying off on rebates. And that was tricky because suddenly, you're reporting on this trial in Tennessee. And if the trial goes haywire and it involves the owner of the Cleveland Browns, that's a real big problem for the ownership, and especially for this city, which still has scars from when Art Modell, up and packed the team away and they moved to Baltimore. That was tricky. But it hasn't been really a big problem for me as far as, what I say on TV and then doing the game on the radio. It is now
We're getting guys to do players still talk to you the same way?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And the structure of it is really tricky too. I mean, I work for the Browns. I don't work for a radio station. I work for the Browns when I'm doing their broadcasts. And obviously I work at the television station. That's, people could say definition of conflict of interest, but, it's worked out well. But the only time it got tricky was when really it was an off-the-field matter more than it was an on-the-field matter.
Jim, if people want to follow the Cleveland Browns or find you on social media or whatnot, how do they track you down?
Well, you just follow me at clevelandbrowns.com. That would probably be the best way.
Jim, appreciate the time. This was fun, so thank you for taking a flyer on me coming on down here and sitting down and chatting for a bit.
It was great. Great to talk to you. Great to meet you.
Fascinating to hear that conversation from a couple of different angles. The feedback systems that NBC had for its broadcasters when it had the NFL rights on the AFC games, for Marty Glickman to call you and, hey, here's what went well, here's what didn't go well. What a built-in feedback system. That's kind of awesome. I did not know that. So it was neat to get that kind of insight to what it's like being a national voice of the NFL. Many thanks to Jim Donovan for taking some time, 45 minutes to sit down, share that kind of knowledge with us. And hopefully, as we said at the end, he will get the opportunity, like Gil Santos, to go through some troublesome years with his team in the NFL and then eventually get back to a Super Bowl or a championship level where he can have some good years here with the Cleveland Browns. And, he said it. I think the league is better when the Browns are better. It's just one of those things. They're a historic franchise, and hopefully they figure things out, and it'll be a little bit more fun to him for him to call those games. Good advice, though, by the way, at the end when it comes to calling games of struggling teams. Just call the game. Call what you see. Talk about physically the plays that are in front of you. Don't get caught up in the fact that your team's losing or getting blown out. Just enjoy the fact about what you're seeing. Play-by-play. Why is this good? Why is that not good? Where can that get improved? And I think that if you use that mentality, man, is it probably easier to get through the drudgery of a difficult season when you just take each play for what it is. So I thought that was some good advice from Jim Donovan as well. But again, many thanks to him for joining us. Many thanks to you for the subscription or the download and the listen, the rating or review if you get an opportunity on iTunes to throw a couple of stars our way. that would be much appreciated as well. Until next Friday morning, when the NCAA tournament will be in full swing, this is Play-by-Playcast, and we are out. See ya.